Well, this economic whiplash in the numbers comes as Canada nears the review of its key trade deal with the United States and with Mexico. And this week, there were meetings on both sides of the border ahead of those negotiations. Talks that Canada-U.S. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc says have him feeling better about this process.
If they gave a carve-out to Canadian exports and Mexican exports, it's because it's in their economic interest to do so. So that tells me that there's somewhere a sense that there's value in this trilateral agreement. I'm confident that, and Jameson Greer again this week, I was in Washington Tuesday, referred to those as the load-bearing walls of the trilateral agreement. What we have to do is find a way to lower the sectoral tariffs. I'm convinced that we can find a way to get to a better place, but we're not going to trade away things that are important to Canada just to get a seat in another room.
Louise Blais is Quebec's CUSMA review envoy, and she joins me now. Louise Blais, it's always good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Good to see you, David.
You heard there's been a little bit more optimism in some of the public commentary this week, unless I'm imagining it all. Where do you met with the U.S. ambassador? How do you view where things stand right now with the CUSMA process?
Well, listening to Minister LeBlanc is exactly what we're also hearing from the ambassador. Yes, that ambassador. He had a very good week in Quebec City. We were with him for 2 days. He kept saying, we will get to a deal. We will get there. Obviously, the climate has to improve. And I think this is what we saw this week. We saw movement on both sides of the border that shows that we are both committed to the relationship. The Americans did reduce the tariff on some items that are covered under that derivative of steel and aluminum from 25 to 15%. Not enough, but I think it is a signal. We on our side, obviously, the minister went to Washington with, he said, a list of things that he was mandated by the prime minister to discuss. Very substantive conversations. But, it's going to be, as the minister said, a turbulent road ahead. It was, I think, overall a good week. But I think we also have to look at some of the other signals that we should be really paying attention to.
The ambassador, or yes, that ambassador, as you said, because Ambassador Huckster is often in the news for saying things that really get a lot of attention in a way that a lot of Canadians don't consider to be helpful. But the simple fact that he says, we'll get to a deal without it being followed by, but you're not going to build cars. You need to capitulate on this. You need to capitulate on that. We saw the derivative rate reduce. We saw a CUSMA carve out for the forced labor review. Seems to be formal moves and rhetorical moves that recognize the value of CUSMA, even if it's not resolved. There does seem to be a shift there, correct?
Yes, I think it was always there, but now they're verbalizing it. I mean, they know that things like, for example, some of the high tariffs that they have, whether it's on aluminum, steel, or even softwood lumber, is really hurting them. They're hearing an earful from their own business leaders that these tariffs are unsustainable and something has to give. So they're just managing how that will be done, and that's understandable, I guess, to some degree. I think, but for Canada, I think when I was talking about signals, I think what we have to understand is the United States still respects and wants to maintain healthy, beneficial supply chains with Canada. However, those used to be about efficiency, just in time, better prices. Now they're not just about just in time and better prices. They're about national security. Right. They're seeing everything through the lens of national security, and they want to be dealing with trusted partners.
Right. So Ontario's trade representative, David Patterson, he told the CBC that he's optimistic a deal could be finalized by Labor Day. What is your sense on that timeline? I mean, that is still many, many months away, but with everything that's happened to this point, it feels optimistic. What's your view?
Well, it is optimistic, but I think we have to set goals, even if they're ambitious. We have to keep, I think, this level of intensity that we saw this week. If we could keep that up, then it's not out of the question. And really, it will be in everyone's best interest. I don't think that the Americans want to rag the puck too much longer, because, as I said, some of these sectorial tariffs are hurting their own interests. So I think, I wouldn't want to put a date on it, but I think we need to keep at it. What we need to keep an eye on as Canadians is to make sure that nothing is agreed to or discussed that disadvantages us vis-a-vis what the Americans are discussing with the Mexicans. We're lucky; we have very good relationship with the Mexicans. They want this to be a trilateral agreement, but at the end of the day, everybody has to have a good deal. So the fact that they're going first is a little bit troublesome for us. It's not as if we have been given a choice. We're doing the best out of difficult situation, but that is something we need to keep our eye on.
Right, you have warned about this, the danger of a Mexico first, Canada second approach to this review, though there does seem to be a triangulation maybe happening with Canada and Mexico where they're in frequent contact to try to figure out what they want there. And while they're in formal talks, the Mexicans are, and Canada is not yet with the United States. Janice Charette at the press conference this week did say that they're not waiting for a process to have a formal designation to start resolving issues, right? There's enough frequent points of contact that they can work through some of the thornier things. So how do you interpret that? It seems to me that even if it's not formal, she's signaling they're working on stuff in a substantive way. Do you see it that way?
Yes, well, she's absolutely right. And, the thing is, this is what the Mexicans have been doing leading up to their formal rounds of conversations. They were dealing with certain irritants. There are things that are manageable for us to approach. And it's not, you've heard the minister say, we're not going to make free concessions just to get to the table. It's an exchange. It's a back and forth. It can be tedious at times, but I think a slow progress is progress. So I think that conversations are important. Quebec welcomes this intensity this week, this accelerated pace of conversation. We don't seem to be talking past each other. We seem to be talking at each other. And I think in that sense, the Prime Minister's speech in New York a couple of weeks ago laid the groundwork for that goodwill that we appear to be seeing.
As the envoy for Quebec, I wonder, you mentioned trade irritants and the CRTC decision asking the big streamers to triple their contribution to Canadian content to 15% of revenue. Everybody flagged that right away as a possible trade irritant. It's been sent back. There's been a lot of frustration with that in the cultural sectors, and a lot of that money goes to French language content. So I just wonder what concerns Quebec has over that, if any, in terms of what this means for the cultural exemption and cultural protection issues that come up in these continental trade deals. Do you see any red flags out of this one?
Well, Quebec was surprised. We were not consulted in the decision that was announced by Minister Miller, even though that we did meet with him along with the cultural industry in Quebec last week. There was no hints of this. It is something that we would have preferred to have been consulted on. There are I'm not representing the cultural community, but they do worry that this investment that has been put forward may not be perennial, and so it's not a real replacement, perhaps. So I think we need to talk, and I think that's a little bit why I've been appointed to represent Quebec's interests, is just to make sure that we, if we are going to make adjustments, I'm not talking about concessions, but adjustments, we should be in the know. And maybe we'll be able to contribute a way, an approach where there's a win-win. There's not, I don't want to be naive here, but that's what Quebec wants. We are disproportionately affected by the tariffs right now, just given the sectors of our economy in Quebec that are important. And so we really do believe that we should be part of the conversation and we should be part of the decision, especially when it comes to domestic issues. Even though they are federally controlled, they have a huge impact in Quebec. So that is what we're expecting, and we'll be continuing the conversation with our counterparts at the federal level.
Louise Blais, Quebec's CUSMA Review Envoy. We always appreciate the time. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, David.